Good morning. So we are up to Hamshachayim Beis, Volume 2, New Mimer, 142. The bottom of page 1181. It's called Koyamar Hashem, Hashemayim Kisi, V'aretz Hadem Ragli. And as you may recall, there's in the beginning of the book of the Sefer, there's a short few words that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab's son, wrote to summarize the beginning of each discourse. So the last discourse was Yichudi Lav, Yichudi Tata, which was the central theme, the main theme in the beginning of the discourse. But throughout, the idea of Yichudi Lav, Yichudi Tata within the human being, just to sum up what we learned, to find within us Das Elyon and Das Tachten, which he broke down ultimately into 2 levels, but then broke it further down to 3 levels. And that is the perspective from below, is where we discover the divine within existence. The perspective from above is where we discover the divine, even above our existence, is still rooted in higher levels of the divine. And then that's the bittul of the kelim. And then there's the Das Elyon, what he called the true Das Elyon, the true higher perspective, is where everything is completely, what did he call? Sharshin and Atzmus Ein Sof. That means that, I'm just looking for the actual language. That's essentially recognizing the etzem of everything, especially of the soul connected to the etzem above, and that goes down to being even beyond any type of comprehension. It's recognizing the true nature that existence is all about the divine source. Does he use the kulika make a chashiv on the second level or on the third level? Yeah, second level. Okay. Fine. And these were called 2 different types of yichud Havaya and Elikim, or the shiluv Havaya in Adnai, or the shiluv of Adnai in Havaya. And the shiluv of Adnai Havaya, the 2 levels that I just discussed. So that is the last Maimer 141. Right. Which is called Yichud Tata and Yichud Elah. That's why it's Yichud Tata, Yichud of Havaya and Elikim, in the 2 ways, whether Elikim is dominant and Havaya within Elikim, or Havaya is dominant and it's Elikim within Havaya, or rather Adnai and Elikim here are replaceable. They are reverse. They're synonymous, as he said, in general. Okay, good. So now we're going to enter the next Maimer, 142. So I'm going to begin at the bottom of page 1181. If you want to look up, follow the text, it's on ayinbeis.com. If you don't have the actual book, ayinbeis.com, where all these pages are scanned and you can view or download them. So the Maimer is following Bereshis. This is Shabbos Parsha Noach. The Shabbos Reish Chodesh Etru Ayin Tov Reish Vav. So that year Noach was Reish Chodesh. So the Maimer that the Rebbe Rashab said was a Reish Chodesh from the Haftarah of Reish Chodesh. Not from Parsha Noach, but from Reish Chodesh, because it was Shabbos Reish Chodesh. So he says like this. What does he say in the book of Yeshaya, the end of Yeshaya? Koyamar Hashem. So says God, Hashemayim Kisi v'aretz Hadem Ragli. The heaven is my throne, and the earth is my pedestal, is my footstool rather. So heaven is God's throne, and the earth is God's footstool. The Tzarich L'Havin. So the Rebbe Rashab asked the question. We have to understand. V'haloi ein le d'musagu v'lei guf. God doesn't have not the image of a body, not the form of a body, and not a body. That's the pasuk in Yecheskel. V'im came out in Yikisi v'adem ragli. So how do we apply such expression to God the idea of a throne, that he sits on a throne. Like a king would sit on a throne and his feet would be on a footstool. But how do you apply that to God, who's beyond and transcends any type of bodily structure, not just guf, a body, even the mus of a guf, even the image of a body or the form or shape of one? I understand you can ask the question about many psukim like this, where we refer to God in ways that God saw, God heard, God spoke. But he's addressing it on this pasuk. And okay. Then he goes on, says the Rebbe Rashab, Gemara Chagiga, and the Gemara, the Talmud, the Chagiga says, "B'machlekas de Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, im Shamayim Kodma Eretz Kodma." So the Gemara Chagiga relates to us that there's a disagreement between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were two schools of two academies. One was the house of the Academy of Shammai, students of Shammai, and there was Beis Hillel, the students of Hillel. And we know they had different disagreements. One of them was when they asked the question, what came first? What did God create first? Heaven or earth? So even though the pasuk says, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz, nevertheless, there's a disagreement because there are different sources to explain it each way. So there's a disagreement between Beis Shammai and Hillel, mi kodmu, im shamayim kodmu, did heaven come first? Or im oy eretz kodma, or earth came first. Which one did God create first? Amalei Beis Shammai. So he says now, and this machlek is there. If you look at Chagiga, there's a discussion between the house of Shammai, the Academy of Shammai, the Academy of Hillel. They discuss it. So he says, in that disagreement, in Chagiga, here's what they discuss. Amalei Beis Shammai le Beis Hillel. The house of Shammai, the students of Shammai said to the students of Hillel, L'divreichem, according to you, Hillel said, Beis Hillel says, the earth created first. According to you, the Eretz Kodma. So he's asking a question. Odom Eshe Shrafrav Achakach Kisei. Does a person first create a shrafraf? Is Hadim Ragli, is a footstool. Does a person first create a footstool, and then he creates a throne? Shenemar Hashamayim Kisi. Hashamayim, the heaven is the throne, the earth is the footstool. So basically, they're questioning, is that the order? Shammai, Beis Shammai, it works well. First comes the heaven, the throne, and then comes the footstool. But according to you, that you're saying that the earth came first, and according to the pasuk, the earth is the footstool. Does the footstool precede the throne? Upirish Rashi, and Rashi there in Gemara and Chagiga comments. What is it? What's the meaning of this? So Rashi says, next page 1182. First, a person builds a throne. And according to the height of the throne, the size of the throne, then he builds the footstool. In other words, he's explaining Shammai's argument here. It's not just technically that a throne is more important than the footstool. You don't know the size of the footstool until you make the size of the throne. Because once you know the size of the throne, you know the size the king needs a throne. Footstools are different heights. Different people have different footstools. So first you build the throne. According to the throne, you build the footstool. I don't know if what I just said about the kings to the size of the person, but either way, the bottom line is the footstool is measured according to the throne. If the throne is a very high throne, obviously the footstools have to be higher. If the throne is lower, the footstool is lower. So Rashi is explaining that it's not just that the throne comes first. It's simply you don't build a footstool until you build the footstool commensurate to the size of the throne. So that's the Gemara. So that's why Shammai has his own reasons that Shamayim comes first. Hillel has his argument why Eretz comes first. Ultimately, we'll learn the reasons, but he's just explained the Gemara. Remember, the question still is, but now he's going further in the Gemara. So the Rebbe Rashab says, another question. How does Beis Hillel explain this? How do you explain this, according to Beis Hillel? Shammai's argument, Beis Shammai's argument seems to be a very solid argument. So how do you explain it according to Beis Hillel? So we have two questions on this verse. how could you refer to God in bodily terms? Basically, anthropomorphism claims there's no bodily elements in God. How could you speak about a leg, footstool, a throne, and so on? And the second question is regarding what is Hillel's explanation and understanding and explaining that earth came before heaven in context of this Gemara Chagiga, which is based on this verse, obviously. Shemayim is the throne and the footstool is the earth. The earth is the footstool. Okay. So again, for those that may not recall or just always good to refresh, these beginnings and ends of each discourse, which will only go for another 2 Maimarim, were added later. In other words, the actual discourse continued to flow. The Rebbe Rashab then added beginnings and ends that related to the Parsha, like we just said, the Dibra Maschel, the opening. And to connect the opening of the discourse, in this case, Koyamar Hashem, to what he speaks afterwards, now the Rebbe Rashab sums up what we learned earlier, and according to what we learned earlier, we're going to understand this verse as well. So that's what he says now. And to understand these questions about heaven and earth, when one needs to preface that which was explained earlier. What was explained? The yichud, the unification of the two names of God. Havaya, the transcendent divine. Elikim, the divine that enters into existence. Shazel bebezei fanim. That there's two ways to be miyachid, to unite Havaya and Elikim. The two methods, two ways. The das elyon, the das tachten. One way is through das elyon, the way, the perspective from above. And the second, the das tachten. And what is the difference between the two? He said, we learned, v'hu inyan shiluv havaya ba'adnai. The shiluv, the intertwining of Havaya in Adnai, which means revealing the divine in the Adnai, revealing the Elokus of Havaya in the Elokus as it is within existence. And the other way, V'shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya, to recognize that the divine that enters in existence really, compared to higher levels, is completely nullified. So it's not focused on creation, it's focused looking up. Basically, is Havaya coming down into Adnai, or is Adnai looking up and being absorbed by Havaya? And then he said, the Ikar Inyan, the Das Elyon, is even higher than that. The recognition and the awareness of Atzmus Ein Sof that's higher than Havaya and Elikim. Or at least Havaya as it relates to Elikim or to Adnai. In other words, a place that you're talking about Atzmus Ein Sof, not just that the Kalim and the divine levels are absorbed that which which is higher than Atzilus, like he said, Das Elyon of Atzilus, but rather all the way up Atzmus Ein Sof, recognizing that God is neither the Elokus that's higher than existence, nor the Elokus, the godliness within existence. He's beyond both. Atzmus Ein Sof. The Hein Beis HaYedias, and these are the two awareness, the two levels of perception. Shaydei Lechem min ha'aretz, that comes from the bread from earth. The Lechem min hashamayim. And the bread from heaven. As we learned, the bread from earth is recognizing the divine energy within earth, within existence. The bread from heaven brings us a level of divine revelation that's higher than existence. And then he says that's in general, ubederech prat. And when you break it down, hein gimel madreges. It comes down to three levels. Ha'echad, b'chinas das tachten, the b'chinas malchus. Das tachten, the level of malchus that relates to the existence. The chen in general, ba'oyer, the seder ishtalshlus. The oyer, the divine energy of the cosmic order. V'hu de habirurim de biyah. That is revealed and transformed and drawn into existence through the birurim of Bri Yitzir Asiyah, birurim, lechem min ha'aretz, and all the work of clarifying and separating and clarifying and refining the world, as we discussed at length, and especially specifically at the bottom of page or lower to the lower part of page 1179. That's level 1. Beis. Second is that it's a perception awareness in the levels that are higher than the cosmic order. That's the root and the source of where the cosmic order originates. That is through the sublimation, the nullification of the kalim. So there's kalim, but the kalim are completely absorbed by that which is higher than the within the keli, even the that's higher than the within the keli. This is the desire of the heart that you come to. That's l'mayla metam v'das. In other words, higher than our comprehension and our kalim, our structure. So you're basically relating to the divine beyond the structure, but that's still not the highest level. Gimel, the highest level, what he called earlier, the true das Ayin, is who Gimel b'chinas atzmus ein sof b'chinas ha'ayin ha'amiti. Atzmus ein sof means the oyer, not only as it's higher than the kalim, but the ayin ha'amiti, the true ayin ha'amiti, in all the levels of it, where it is completely absorbed by the source itself, by atzmus. So you see here clearly that the third level is not atzmus, it's atzmus ha'oyer. Atzmus ein sof, which is all it is a reflection of its source. And we learned the different levels where that is. So generally speaking, in the context of this maimer, as he said, kan, in this maimer is talking pnimi. So you may recall, we spoke about 3 levels of oiris. There's oiris in kalim, there's oiris higher than kalim, and there's oiris that are even higher than the oiris in kalim. Like basically, Nakuda Kav Shetach, if you may recall. Nakuda Kav Shetach, especially in Tzadik Daled, was you have the oir, let's say the oir of the Pnimius HaKav, you have the Kav, Chitzenius HaKav, and then there's the oir as it goes into Kalim. And you can really explain it on any of the 3 levels we spoke about. You can speak about oir lifnei tzimtzum, you can speak oir after the tzimtzum, and then the oir as it goes into Kalim. So when you're talking about the oiris and Kalim, ultimately that will come down into Biyah, and that's where Birurim, that's Das Tacht. When you're talking about the kalim being bottled to the earth that's higher than the earth in the kalim, that is das elyon of Re'usa Deliba, the second level. But it's still commensurate to the kalim. The kalim are being bottled. In other words, it's higher than the shtalshalos, but it still relates to existence. And then there's the third level where it's completely about the source itself. So in the interface of the ayin itself that we learned about, that's an interface. You see here, interface within an interface. Because in a way, these 3 levels, again, one relates more to existence, one relates to the source, and the middle one is in between the 2. So just amplifies the point that the Ayin Beis is looking for all the different levels of how we climb from the yesh below all the way to the highest levels of Ayin. So first you begin with Ayin of the yesh hanivra, of course, which is das tachten. Then you move to the Ayin of the yesh hamiti, but on a lower level, until finally the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti on the highest level, where all there is the source itself, and that itself, if you remember, there were 4 ways he explained it. So it could be that maybe the lower levels of it may relate to the lower level of Das Ayin. That needs to be discussed and elaborated upon. But regardless, yeah, you could say that, but because he said 4 ways in explaining Ayin of Yesh Hamiti, which would be Das Elyon. And then there's Ayin of Yesh Hamiti, then there's the Ayin of Yesh Hanivra, and they're also explained several different ways of understanding that. Yeah. Okay, regardless, wherever you go, whatever level you're at, even before the Tzimtzum we learned, there's an Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra. There's a Das Tachten, relatively speaking. Ano Emlech, when God relates before the Tzimtzum, when he envisions existence, Shiur Atzmei B'Koyach, the 10 hidden spheres. So relative to the higher levels of Oyer that don't yet have spheres, that would be called Das Tacht. So all this can be applied, but in this Maimer in Ayin Beis, he made it very clear he's talking primarily according to the explanation that we're talking. Everything is in Oyer Pnimi, is in the immanent energy. He said that very clearly. I'll just point it out to you again, so you'll see it. He says Kan. On the bottom of page 1149, the very key line, where he says, with all the different interpretations, the The close b'chinas ayin hamamutza b'chinas yesh b'chinas pnimi. So primarily we're talking pnimi, but you could apply whatever we learned to even the higher levels of makif and atzmi and all the levels where he discussed the different two levels of ayin. This goes back to pages 11, essentially 1147 through 1151, approximately those pages. Okay. So good. So we have here a very clear summary from the Rebbe Rashab himself, the three levels. And now, as you may recall, we talked, this is all within V'yadaita Hayom, the pasuk that began so much earlier being discussed. The Rebbe Rashab discussed it back, said almost 180 pages back. Aleph Kuf Tzadik Tes, right? Taf Kuf Tzadik Tes, sorry. Taf Kuf Tzadik Tes, which would be 900. Let me just make sure. Sorry, Taf Kuf Tzadik Vav. 996, page 996, he began V'yadaita Hayom. He referred to it quite a few times throughout. The last time where there was a key, I'll just give you the landscape. Where we spoke V'yadaita Hayom was the verses on the pasuk. Here we go, page 1132. And now he's going back in 1182, going back to that verse. So we explained so far the words Hayom. That was the first thing he explained. Yom v'layla tzimtzum and Ratzeh and Shuv, Shabbos and weekdays, Lechem min hashamayim, Lechem min haaretz, Das Elyon, Das Tachten. Explained V'yadaita. He explained Havayahu Alikim. And briefly also explained V'yadaita in V'shavesa levavecha, how from mind it has to go to the heart, which is what Das does. Das is the bridge that connects you to the idea, which ultimately gives birth to feelings and emotions. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to be medaik now in the words b'shamayim mimal v'al oretz mitachas. So again, the pasuk goes like this: V'yadaita Hayom in Parsha V'eschanan, v'ashavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu alikim b'shamayim mimal v'al oretz mitachas ein oid. That's the full verse. We explained V'yadaita, Das, Hayom, v'ashavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu alikim. But what's b'shamayim mimal v'ala oretz mitachas? If you go back page, what I just said, 996, he asked the other question, once you say shamayim mimal, why do you need oretz mitachas? Why do you need both heaven and earth? Once you know God is everywhere, he's everywhere. So he's going to explain these two terms and why the pasuk emphasizes. So it's all in the context of unifying and integrating heaven and earth, integrating the divine and existence. This is the essential theme of Ayin Beis. The interface. And now it's all being seen through the eyes of this pasuk V'yadaita Hayom. I can't emphasize it enough because we're talking about 200 pages, 180 pages already, and we're going to have another many, many pages till we go into middle of volume 3, where the Rebbe Rashab then goes back to the final word. After he says B'shamayim al-oretz mitachas, he'll begin to discuss what are the last words, ein oid. There's nothing else. So he's going through the pasuk and literally analyzing and elaborating upon it. So that's why I'm underscoring it very strongly here, because it's a very key anchor to understanding all these ideas in the Hemshech, especially as I said in the last 185 pages. Okay, but before we continue, because this is going to be a new section. I mean, obviously it's continuing from what we learned about the unity. But before I continue right now, if anybody has any questions, I'll pause. And if not, we'll just continue here. But it is starting a new subject matter, like a new subplot within the plot that we've already been learning. Okay. So we move on. Good. Okay, now that we've established this, Das Elyon, Das Tachten, Das Tachten, Das Elyon, the two levels, it says, this is an expression of Chassidus. Uma'ata means, and now we need to understand. I mean, I know you could say, why does it say Va'ata tzarech lahavin? But that's the expression you find in many, many Maimarim. Uma'ata tzarech lahavin Now we need to understand Masha Kosav Yadaita Hayim Ki Avayu Elikim B'Shamayim Me'amamal V'La'oretz Mitochas. We need to understand the continuing part of the verse. Okay, so know today, be aware today, it's a mitzvah for you to know, das, to feel and experience the divine on all levels we described, the 2-3 levels, and ki Avayu hu Elikim, that Avayu is Elikim, both in Das Tachten and Das Elyon, and the highest levels of Das Elyon. But now he said, B'Shamayim Mimal, the heavens above, V'La'oretz Mitochas, heaven above, and the earth below. Shenizbar Le'il, it was explained earlier, and now he's referring back to the Maimon I just told you, 996. V'Yidaber Kol HaDvorim Ha'ela. The Maimon is V'Yidaber Hashem Elikim, Anechi Hashem Lekachas Kol HaDvorim Ha'ela. So if you go back again, 996, the Maimon begins there. It's the middle of the Maimon. V'Yidaber Elikim is Kol HaDvorim Ha'ela Leimer, Anechi Hashem Lekachas. So he's calling the Maimon V'Yidaber Kol HaDvorim, just to tell us, because just V'Yidaber is too vague. So he's referring to the Maimon that begins on 994, but specifically the pages 996 and 997. So what was explained back there, that's why I remember I read it just a few days ago. There it was explained the question, Akushya, the question, Ma'u Emri B'Shamayim Mimal V'Oretz Mitochas. Why does he have to say these two phrases, in heaven above and earth below? The Ma'achad Avayu Elikim B'Shamayim Mimal. Once you know that Avayu is Elikim in the heaven above, K'moy Kain Hu B'Oretz Mitochas. Why would you think otherwise? Once you've established the yichud of Avayu and Elikim, that Avayu is Elikim, that the divine in existence is being revealed, why would you distinguish between heaven and earth? God created one existence. If you reveal it in one place, you know the rest of existence is also, the same idea applies. Why does it need to be spelled out? Shemayim and Aretz are both part of creation. If something happens at Shemayim, it also happens in Aretz. So why do you need to spell it out in specific terms? That b'Shamayim Mimal v'Aretz Mitochas. That's the question. He asked that back in 997, page 997, and now he's repeating the question because he never answered that question yet. We explained the beginning of the verse, but not this second part. And he explains further the question. Shahar Shemayim va'aretz. Below they say, missing a word. It should say Shahar Shemayim va'aretz Shneim. It's a taz de muchach because it says Shneim, so you have to say it's referring to heaven and earth. Heaven and earth both were created b'Shem Elikim, making it even stronger. They're both created from the name Elikim. Bereishis bara Elikim es Hashamayim es Aretz. If Shemayim was connected to Havaya and Aretz was connected to Elikim, you could say, okay, that's why you need to spell it out. But both were created for Shem Elikim. Ukasher Havayu Elikim ala Aretz mitochas k'moykenu b'Shemayim mimal. Now he's going the other way around. He could have said only Aretz mitochas. Either way. Since they're both created by the name Elikim, so once you say Avayu Elikim, either in Shemayim Mimal or Eretz Mitochas, so the same is, if it's in the earth below, it's also in the heaven above. Why does the verse, the Posuk, have to elaborate on this? Why does it need to say both statements? Which clearly comes to add something, not just to tell us that it's also on earth or only in heaven. There's something that's coming to be told here. So that's the question. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to answer two answers. One is going to be Al Pi Poshet. That's going to be right now. This answer is going to go for several pages till the end of this mimer, all the way to page 1189. The next mimer, if you look on page 1189, Aleph Kuf Peites, you'll see Omnam Yesh Leimer. The second the lower paragraph on page 1189. Then he goes a deeper explanation. So there's going to be two general explanations of why the verse states both phrases, heaven above and earth below. That Havaya Elikim is in both areas. So this one is going to go for 7 pages, and then comes the next explanation as I just pointed out. So now he's going to say the first explanation. V'hine. And now, al pi poshet yeshlemer, on a basic level, you can say, on a literal level, poshet means in pshat, simple explanation. Yeshlemer, that the pasuk is coming to add a certain emphasis. Shezehu lahoitzi midas haminim, it's coming to negate and invalidate the das haminim, the opinion of apostates, of apicators, of a min, of heretics that deny. And what do they say? She'emnim, they argue, shtei reshuyas hein chaz v'shalom, that existence, that there are two entities, there are two domains. Two domains. One is in heaven and one is earth. They separate between the God in heaven and the God in earth, basically. God forbid. V'hine, sorry. Amar ha'amgushi la'meimar. So in Sanhedrin, there's a discussion, a dialogue between Amgushi and Ameimar. These are two names.
Amgushi is a mechashev.
Yeah, they were two sorcerers. What's that? No, Amgushi was the sorcerer, and Ameimar was a scholar. So what did he say to him? He says, what? Excuse me?
Ameimar is a moiro. A nomen for a moiro.
What did I say? Yeah. So the sorcerer says to the scholar, to the sage, the Hurmiz, the top half belongs to Hurmiz. Hurmiz was a king. The Ahurmiz. Ahurmiz was another leader. Basically, the first half belongs to one, to Hurmiz, and the lower half belongs to Ahurmiz, which essentially is the concept of shtei reshuyas, that existence is divided into two. One belongs to one, another belongs to another, like the example of two kings, two leaders. They say like the top half of the country the northern part belongs to one, and the southern part belongs to someone else. What does that mean? What is he trying to say? God left earth. Earth belongs to human beings. God left the earth, and where does he go? Only Hashemayim Kvede. His honor is in heaven. You want to meet God, you have to go to heaven. Basically, the pasuk is coming to negate the idea that heaven and earth are two different domains, one that belongs to God and one belongs to the human being or to whoever is in control on earth. Yeah. And God does not govern, does not rule over, providence is not on earth, chas v'shalom. So in other words, that's what the pasuk is coming to say. Not just in Shemayim, like they would argue, but also ala oretz mitachas. That same unity of the divine is not just in heaven, also on earth, and that's what the pasuk is coming to negate. That's what he's saying. Now the Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain this in more depth and more elaborately, but it's still the first explanation, the pashut. What does he say? Just as in Gashmius, you talk about heaven and earth, you could say God's kvede is only on and is only in heaven, not on earth. He says the same thing in Ruchnis. Like the pasuk says in Tehillim, Lama yemer agoyim ayeno elekechem. This is a statement where David HaMelech is bemoaning the fact when God is concealed. And you see that the good people, righteous people are being hurt. So he's saying to God, why are you allowing Goyim to say they'll be able to claim, where's your God? Like a big argument during the Holocaust. There's the God of the Jewish people. Where is it? So in other words, he's saying, forget about what, we're not even talking about our benefit. They will be, it's an insult to you. It's a chil Hashem that they should say, where's your God? That in other words, they can argue God is not here with us. So Rabbi Rashab is going to explain what this argument is that the Goyim say. Hainu, what does it mean? And Ayin, that since mitzvahs are being done, mitzvahs maisis in action, this is one of the ways Chassidus explains this pasuk. Mitzvahs maisis are being down below, and it's supposed to be mamshich halakus. We know every mitzvah draws down godliness, but we don't see it. Because on the contrary, we sometimes see that people who do mitzvahs are oppressed and they're hurt, and they can be afflicted in many ways. The goyim that say Ayel Ekechem have no issue when it comes to the Aveda of Ruchnius, a spiritual type of work. We're not talking about doing a mitzvah like mitzvah maisis, tzitzis, tefillin, physical things. On spiritual work, like the Aveda of the Ovis we know did not do mitzvahs maisis. Except bris, everything was done spiritually. They were kaim kol mitzvah kol teira kula actualize nitna, but not physically. Everything was spiritually. So, like the Aveda Sa'adas ukahai gavna or similar, they don't have an issue. Spirituality draws down spirituality. Spiritual activity draws down elikus. What they have a problem with, and that's their argument, how do you draw down godliness through actions? Actions are very basic, are very mundane, simple activities. God is beyond details of a human being. So if you're talking about spiritual, okay. But if you're talking about a simple physical act, how do you draw down elikus? So he's saying Ayel Ekechem here on a more subtle and a deeper level. That they're saying, where's godliness in mitzvahs maisis? Okay, let me just elaborate a minute on this. There's a long parenthesis. Let me see. This parenthesis is not a short one, if I recall correctly. Let me see. How long ago is the next parenthesis? The parenthesis goes all the way to the bottom. No. Yeah, it goes to three lines at the bottom of the page. Okay, let me first explain this. This is an interesting letter from the Rebbe that he wrote once to a conference in England, a conference on Jewish mysticism. And in the letter, the Rebbe writes that one of the key differences between Jewish mysticism and other schools of mysticism is that you can achieve more through a simple act than through a meditation, than through thought. Because if you think logically, what do you think, what would make a person more spiritual? A simple act like lighting a candle or giving charity? Those are nice things. But if you want loftiness, if you want the sublime, meditation, becoming a more spiritual person, you wouldn't think logically that Maisa reaches deeper than Machshava. And yet, the way God created the world is that he wants dafke mitzvahs maisis. So from a philosophical point of view, the nations of the world, meaning the scholars, the mystics, always argued it's not through simple actions. It's moving away from the primal and the mundane and becoming a more spiritual person, like asceticism. And yet Yiddishkeit does not preach asceticism. Prishus is not the way. even though there may have been a time of certain people who are prushim, which means they were ascetic lifestyle, and they denied themselves this physical world as much as possible. A lot of fasting, even self-flagellation, even self-affliction. There was a time, but it was only yechidim. And then after the Baal Shem Tov, he made it clear that's not the Seder Aved anymore. Famous Torah, Kisira Chamer, Parsha Mishpatim we just read. Kisira Chamer Senacha. So the pasuk talks about you see the donkey of your enemy. So you would think you can ignore it, even though the donkey is the weight of the donkey is burdening him. So the pasuk says, "Ozav tazavime." Go help him, even though it's the donkey of your enemy. Says the Baal Shem Tov, "Kisir chamer senacha." You'll see the chaymer, the material, the coarseness of your body, and you will think senacha, it's your enemy, because the body has temptations and taivas and desires, and is the enemy of the nefesh of the kiss of your divine soul. So you would think you can ignore it. So he says, no, ozav tazavim, work with your body, elevate it, refine it. In other words, the work is not by avoiding the material world, it's by engaging with it and elevating it. This became the common approach, especially after Chassidus. But even before, Pernicious was never the derech. It was an Islam, it was an exception. A Nazir, for example, because he did something or saw something that was not appropriate, so he took upon himself. But the Gemara says, it's enough with God. The Torah forbade you to do. You don't have to add more things. That's why you have to bring a korban, a neder, after a neder, and so on. It's another discussion. Does it add something? Yes, it could add something after the fact, but it's not the regular path. So Judaism does not preach asceticism. There were other schools of thought that did. So Rebbe Rashab is saying here, not just the basic story with with Hurmiz and Ahurmiz, with the Amgushi and the Ameimer. In other words, that this domain belongs to one, and this separating between Shemayim and heaven and earth, also on a deeper level, on a higher level, separating and saying that you want God, you need to be spiritual. God does not associate with the material world. So the Lakus in Ruchnius, no problem. The Lakus in Gashmis and Mais Mitzvus Maisis, that's Ayel Lekechem. How do you find God in simple actions? That's their taina. So he's going to say here, the pasuk is coming to tell us that's not the case. That God is found not just in spirituality, in Shemayim Imal, but also in the physical, Ma'aretz Mitochas, in the physical matter of a physical, simple act. You take a piece of a tzemer, piece of wool, and you make from it tzitzis, sklaf. You take animal hide and you turn it into parchment that you make a mezuzah, film, sefer Torah. And the same thing with all the mitzvahs maisius, simple actions. But Oretz Metachas is also Havaya Elikim. That's the gist of where he's going now. But doing so, the Rebbe Rashab is now going to go more detail about this argument of godliness in the spiritual or in the material. Just to round it out a bit, even though you can't compare it, the Rambam, the Machlekes of the Rambam and the Ramban about what is the ultimate reward has a similar element to it, even though not quite, because the Rambam obviously Chaz v'Sholem is he trying to separate. But the Rambam says that the Ikar Schar will be in Elam Haba, the Neshamas without bodies, because a body, in a logical sense, does not have the same capacity to experience Elokus, godliness, and the divine like a soul. And yet the Ramban, so therefore the Rambam holds yes, Tchis HaMesim, there'll be Tchis HaMesim to reward the bodies that participated in the Avodah of Torah Mitzvahs on this earth. But then that will be only during a temporary period. And then it will be Neshamas Nenim Miziv Ashchina forever and ever. Souls will bask and grow in divine glory and the divine basking in divine spirit forever and ever. The Ramban says, no, Tchis HaMesim is forever. Tchis HaMesim is the permanent state. And that Al Tzemach Tzedek says that the Alter Rebbe everywhere goes with the shit of the Ramban. Basically, in the Rebbe's words, that the Psak Din in Kabbalah and Chassidus is like the Ramban, not like the Rambam. Now, God forbid, I'm not saying the Rambam is holding that spiritual is closer to God. He's just saying that ultimately that's the highest level. But the fact is, at the end, we say because Atzmos is just as close to physical than he is to spiritual, as we shall learn later. But right now, I just wanted to bring that into the picture. So this is what he comes to negate in the Pasuk, that it's Shamayim Ma'al, Shamayim Ma'al, Va'aretz Mitachas, that Im Mitzvus Mais is not just Naveda Ruchnis. So the nations of the world means the philosophical approach of the nations was, you want God, you want the divine, you need to go to heaven. You need to be a heavenly person, a spiritual person. This was, especially during the times of the Greeks and those, that was the way they looked at things. Now he's going to talk about Chassidus U'Mese'elam in this regard, in this context. Unless somebody has a question, I'll start the parentheses. Okay, so he says like this now. Tzarech Leimer, the parentheses. Dezeu gam b'Chassidus U'Mese'elam. Hamavur b'Siddur dibra maskul sheishes yomim. So you could argue that this is the nations of the world are saying Ayeh Lekechem because they deny altogether godliness on earth. What about Chassidus U'Mese'elam? Righteous Gentiles, who, as he says in Siddur, Shemasigim K'tzas Gilui, B'chinas Ayin U'Bitla Yesh, they do appreciate and comprehend K'tzas Gilui Elikus in this world. They also appreciate it. Of Gilui B'chinas Ayin, K'tzas Shemasigim K'tzas Gilui B'chinas Ayin, the revelation of the Ayin within the Yesh, and the Bitla Yesh, and the sublimation of the Yesh, what we've been talking about, like the Ayin of the Yesh Anivra. So he says, the Rebbe Rashab says, Umekol Mokim Ha'idah Shalehem. Nevertheless, even though they are more edel, more refined, their acknowledgement, their Hidah, when you say Hidah, it doesn't just mean acknowledgement, it means what they recognize, what they accept. Hurak ba'aveda ruchnis. It's only in aveda ruchnis, it's in spiritual work. So he's saying even the more refined approach, who are not denying and saying there's no godliness on earth, they accept that there's a God. That's why the Chassidus U'Mese'elam. But he's saying it's primarily more in the spiritual dimension. Well, he doesn't say primarily, he says Rak ba'aveda ruchnis, only in aveda ruchnis. Let's go on, let's see what he's going to say. Why? V'zeu mipnei, and that's due to the fact shehilchim rak acher ha'seichel. Because when you go only by philosophy, meaning you're discovering and recognizing the divine based on seichel, logic, fine. So when they go by this rational approach, they distinguish between ruchnis and gashmis, between the spiritual and the physical. As I mentioned, even the Rambam does. I'm only bringing again, not because I want to bring that the Rambam is on this level, just to show you that when you go purely by logic, yes, ruchnis seems to be superior to physical, to gashmis. Because that which is supra-rational, beyond logic, like the matter of faith, like faith, amunah. That's dafke in the souls of Israel. I know you could ask immediate question, don't we see this faith also by non-Jews, especially Chassidus U'Mese'elam? So let's learn, and I'll explain it all. There is faith by them. It's all a question of what level. I actually spoke about it last night in my life. Okay. Like it says elsewhere, and it was mentioned also above, the amunah pshuta b'neshamas Yisrael, that the simple faith in the souls of Israel, be'in hisavis yesh ma'ayin v'achdus Hashem, in the matter of the creation coming from yesh ma'ayin, a creation that is coming from something that completely non-existence created existence, v'achdus Hashem, and the unity of the divine. So there's two things: the creation from a non-existent state to existence state. When I say non-existence, we mean non-existence on our terms. Remember, Ayin is a different substance; it's a different reality. basically from Ruchnius to Gashmus. And Achdus Hashem. So by Neshamas Yisrael, he says, She'ein tzarech al zeh shum eis umefus klal. For souls of Israel, purely emunah pshuta, does not require any sign and any wonder, any miracle. In other words, it doesn't need any proof. Let me read it again. V'niskel kamkin le'il da'amunah pshuta. B'nishaz v'nisad says v'achnas says she'ein tzarech al zeh shum eis umefus klal hu mishum demazlei chazi. Because the mazel of Neshamas Yisrael just sense it. It's not due to logic. They are wired that way. That's their natural state, having a sense. Mazel, of course, is like the Sheirish HaNeshama, that they sense it. The Sheirish HaNeshama Chazir sees it, senses it. So it's not based on something. The Neshama Kamoshi L'mayla, Hu roya amitis hadavar. The soul, as it is above, sees things the way they are, the truth of things. How existence is created from ayin to yesh, from a non-existent state to an existent state. And how everything is nullified and united, integrated in Ein Sof. That's what the Sheirish and Neshama sees. So B'meila and Neshamas Yisrael have this innate within them. U'mesheirish HaNeshama misneitzis ba'akshama ba'neshama shebeguf. And from the root of the soul, which is completely aware of this, misneitzis, it's like sparks or sparkles. Misneitzis is like a spark shoots off from the main flame in the neshama as it enters the body, u'ba b'bchinas emunah, and comes in a form of simple faith. So basically it's like this. The neshama above, meaning when it's not bound to the body, before it enters this world, it fundamentally sees and experiences this reality of yesh ma'ayin. It sees it happening. It recognizes the bittul and yichud of all of existence. When the neshama comes to the body, we don't feel that. But from that comes, one spark of that is the faith that we have. The simple faith that that's true. So it's not experiencing and seeing it, but it's still amunah pshuta. And this is, he says, unique to souls of Israel. Because it's not coming from seichel. It's not due to a contemplation or to a izbonus or a saga. When he
Like
says,
he said,
one second. When he says li'il, I assume he means probably page 1180 when he spoke about the third level. So he said, remember he said that there, it's not due to hasoga. It's a das due to the etzem haneshama connecting and feeling that it's connected. Mushreshes ba'atzmus ein sof. I'm assuming that's what he means, li'il. Because that literally 2 pages ago. So this is not due to contemplation. This is not due to thinking about, oh, godliness is giving me life and sustenance, or godliness is above us because God created all of this. But this is coming from a deeply rooted place, like a child rooted in its parent. And this translates into Amunah. So far what he said, I'll take your question in a minute, is that Chassidim Elam, who do have somewhat of an experience of the divine, he says it's in the spiritual side of things. Whereas, and the reason for that is because they go with seichel. When you go with logic and rationale, there's a difference between spiritual and material. That which is above seichel, so far he said, now that's neshama, like Amunah, that's neshamas Yisrael, who have this due to their root of their soul. And even as the soul comes in the body, it translates into faith. That's what he said so far. Not finished yet. You want to ask something or say something? Okay. Let's continue. I would suggest holding all questions until we finish this parentheses, because probably there's a bigger subject unfolding here. Okay. Now he's going to explain the difference between how it is in the Neshama above and how it comes down below. The Neshama above, before it manifests inside of a body in this material world. That's the word riyah, chazi, mazlai chazi. Chazi comes from the word seeing, perceiving with, like he says, riyah. Says it twice. Roya amitis hadover. It sees the truth. So the Shiur in the Maila, it's in a form of riyah. Loi ba'asaga levad. Not in comprehension alone. It's not only comprehension. I guess he's explaining. So it also, when it comes to neshama beguf, it also comes in the form of amunah, not hasaga. It's faith. Because since the neshama, it would be something, I'll just give a very balbatish example. If you, at some point in your life, in the past, you saw something very real, you saw the truth of something, then years pass, and you move on, and you slowly forget. But you never can forget what actually you saw. You don't see it right now, but because you saw it and it became part of who you are, it resonates with you. So even though now you may not see it quite the same way, especially in neshama comes in the body where we made to forget what the neshama sees above, but still implanted within us is a sense. It's like saying, I get that, but it's in the form of amunah, not in the form of asogit. It's not you understand it. It's not internalized. It's just like a sixth sense that you know. And no, you are aware of a certain element of faith in the truth of that reality.
Lemailo mitam vedas. It's stronger than hasaga.
He's calling it amunah. That's not hasaga.
He said lemailo mitam vedas.
Listen, I don't like, he's going to say that, we didn't reach that line yet. I'm explaining so far. We're going to get to that line in a minute. 1 second. So the example I often give with the artist, God created art. From the art, we recognize there's an artist. That could be api seichel even. But then there's knowing what type of artist this is. So the neshama l'mayla knows the artist. So b'meila, there's something that we also recognize about the artist in our amunah, even though we don't have the riyah, we don't see it, but we sense it. That's what he's saying here. So it's our amunah. The words again, neshama is b'chinas riyah, leiba sagel levad, uba b'neshama shegu gam ken b'chinas amunah shalamayla mitam v'das. Yeah. Now he says shalamayla mitam v'das. That's beyond comprehension and understanding and logic and rationale. And this is applicable. This fits only by souls of Israel. And not by the nations of the world. The ima yes. Now he's going to qualify this. The ima yes sheyesh behem gam kein eitzer neshamas hanikra guf. Even though we know, the Gemara says in Nida, this is brought in that letter from the Rebbe that I referred you to in volume Chelik Gimel, page 230. He brings this Tosfos, this Gemara and Tosfos, about that we know that by non-Jews there's also a neshama. It's called Eitzer HaNeshamas HaNikra Guf. Eitzer HaNeshamas means a reservoir, an Eitzer, a treasure, or a place of where souls reside. Just like there's a Gan Eden, where we talk about the souls of Israel, there's also a place of souls of non-Jews. Ukedas Rabbi Elchanan, like the opinion of Rabbi Elchanan, Nida, here he says, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, below they write, it's Daf Hey, Avodah Zarah, Daf Hey, Amud Aleph. So why the Rebbe Rashab wrote Nida Yud Gimel Amud Beis, it's not clear, but it is in Avodah Zarah, Daf Hey, Amud Aleph.
And not in Nida. I don't know. The Rebbe Rashab said Nida, but it said
Nida and also different daf. He said Nida Gimel Beis. It's what we know. It's in Avodah Zarah Hey Aleph. The Rebbe Rashab wrote that, so there may be something there. If you go there, maybe you could find something. I looked many times there. I couldn't really find any reference why the Rebbe Rashab would write it, but these are sometimes. Either there's a thing going on. You could always say aplitas hapeh, aplitas hakulmis, that it's a typo. But the Rebbe Rashab did write a Gemara and a daf. So the question is why? I don't want to explain it right now because I don't have an answer. But the bottom line is that there is an Eitzer. So he's asking a question. You just told me that this is only in the Neshamas Yisrael, but we know there's also an Eitzer. And we also know for non-Jews, there's also for their souls. That's called the Eitzer Neshamas Hanikra Guf. M'kom mokim ein shayach behem inyan mazlayo chazi. Nevertheless, this mazlayo chazi. Remember, there's a mazlayo chazi in Daniel that was clearly non-Jews. That though they didn't see their mazel saw. That's what Daniel said. That's why they began to tremble. But he's talking about
he's talking about Kamanya Mikhail Lazario.
Can I just ask you again, please? Since I'm middle of a thing and there's other people on the class, I want to just finish this because people have asked me, because it's confusing enough. Just let me finish the whole idea and then I'll be happy to take any questions or comments. So just requesting respectfully. So he says, Mekol Mokim, Ein Shayach Behem, Inyan Mazlai Chazi. So though it's true, they have a special place of their souls, but this Mazlai Chazi we spoke about before, that the Sheiresh HaNeshama sees and perceives Yesh Ma'ayin, creation, and Bittul, and Ardus, and Yichud. This does not exist on the level of by non-Jews. It's already late. Let me just finish the parentheses. And the same is the faith mitzad etzem haneshama, mitzad the core soul, hari ein shayach rak b'neshamas Yisrael. That only applicable to the souls of Israel. That's the level of the divine within the souls. I'm just going to read quickly till the end of the parentheses, and then I'll explain tomorrow more. Okay. And it's known that also levels that are higher than seichel also affect seichel. By having a sense, a feeling that's beyond supra-rational, so he's now adding another point. That when you have this higher, it's not just amunah and hergish, that also has an effect on the comprehension, hanochas ha-seichel, on the resonance of the seichel itself, is also in another level. The leg from seichel is be'efanachar. The leg, it's in Yiddish saying hanocha. Leg means the resonance, the way you relate to it. And if you don't have that higher level, that's supra-rational, rak seichel levad, ein musig, then it will not be understood, and you'll not have that resonant intelligence. How the physical is like the spiritual. Remember, the whole thing began saying that there's a separation between the spiritual and the physical, Shemayim and Oretz. So he's saying that in order to really appreciate that, you have to have this amunah that's higher than the seichel, that in turn informs the seichel that this is possible to us to understand how Gashmis and Ruchnis, there's no difference between them. And that's why the nations of the world that only follow the rational, the logic, that is why they distinguish between the spiritual and the physical. So this is the long parentheses explaining this idea, why they would distinguish between them, and ultimately there's really no distinction. Shemai ma'al va'aretz mitachas, which I'm going to explain more tomorrow, the details, because the bigger question is, we know, I personally know non-Jews who completely relate to this, to Ruchnis and Gashmis being one, and have elements of faith and amunah, and high levels of experience that one would think seem to be the Rebbe Rashab applying only to Jews. So how do you explain that? So we'll talk about that tomorrow. So I'll stop here at the end of the parentheses, bottom of 11.